Well, I do love seeing all of the videos that come out, all of these experts saying, this is the battery that's going to transform the EV industry. This is the one that's going to get rid of ICE cars altogether. This is the one that's going to give a 1,000-mile range and recharge in 30 seconds. There's so many of these, it's sometimes difficult to see what's actually happening out there. Well, hi, I'm Dave. Welcome to Dave Takes It On. So what we're going to do is just have a bit of a reality check on batteries. If we look back to when EVs first started, and I'm talking about 2017 now, I know they started a long time before that, but in the mass market it was about 2016, 2017, particularly when the Model 3 came out. And up until that point, the EV manufacturers were using what was available to them. There was no mass market for batteries specifically for EVs. So they used what was available. And what was available was the NMC, the nickel manganese cobalt. And these were the 18650 batteries, like a very big AA battery. And they had an awful lot of power density, so a lot of power for the size, and that absolutely suited the use they were intended for, which was mobile phones, laptops, power tools, that sort of thing, where they needed to get the batteries as small as possible to fit into the devices. And they're the batteries that were first used by people like Nissan Leaf, Renault Zoe, and the Tesla Roadster. That was what was available. It was not ideal. It wasn't specifically suited for EVs, which had a very different use. An EV current draw or power draw is not the same as a mobile phone, which are much steadier output. And so they were not ideal, but they worked. They were plentiful, they were really quite cheap, and they did a good job. And if you looked after them with a decent battery management system, battery heating and cooling, so you could control the temperature, they're actually very good. And of course, they're still being used today. Sort of the first Roadster was about 15 years ago, and Nissan Leafs, Renault Zoes were about that sort of time, 2010, 2011, and they're still in use. Some of the original Nissan Leafs are still driving around on the original batteries. So they were okay, but they were never ideal. One of the problems, and it was highlighted by the mass media, or mass hysteria, shall we call it, was that these did catch fire. We say it quite blandly, but if they were not looked after, they would catch fire. I mean, it's just like the same as if you have a petrol can. As long as the lid's on it and it's sealed and not put near any excessive heat, perfectly safe. If you leave the top off and then start smoking around it, that same safe container now becomes a potential bomb. And that was the problem with the early batteries, is that they were not looked after well, and some of that was because people didn't understand them properly. So we then got LFP batteries, very different chemistry indeed. So the LFP is much better. It's very, very difficult to get these to spontaneously combust. So it's pretty much eliminated entirely the risk from fire, which is a good thing. But they were lower power density, so you needed a bigger battery to give you the same amount of power. They also wouldn't accept or release that power as quickly as NMC. So they had drawbacks, but on the NMC batteries, something like the early Tesla Model S, the power you got out of that was absolutely ludicrous. It was not needed, so they were overkill, if you like. So you could quite happily drop down to an LFP battery and it would bring that car much more closer to a typical petrol car on the road. So instead of a 0 to 60 time about 3 or 4 seconds, it would be 7 or 8 seconds. And that's pretty fast, but that's quite acceptable in the motoring world that we have today. And those took over quite a few years ago. They were very much cheaper, much safer, much more stable. And so they've taken over to a large extent. But still, an awful lot of the more powerful cars, these are the performance cars, will not use the LFPs. You just can't get the performance or the really long range out of them. So the two run side by side. And that means that today a lot of people have a choice. And I see comments like, well, I've gone LFP because they don't catch fire. I have to say that's an out-of-date comment, because the NMCs no longer catch fire. All batteries, LFP as well, have the potential in an accident, if everything's exposed, destroyed, they are potentially also still able to catch fire. So you'll never get rid of that. If you crash a petrol car, split the fuel tank, crash a diesel car, split the fuel tank, crash an EV, split the battery pack. These all are potential fires or explosions, and we'll never get away from that, because it is energy that we're storing. And energy, one of the ways of releasing it is through fire. So we have the two types at the moment. Very little to choose from. People really shouldn't be choosing from fear of the battery catching fire. That's long since out of date. But then since then, there have been a lot of developments. We've got the first of the sodium batteries. And sodium has one advantage in that it's virtually impossible to catch fire. Again, nothing's impossible if you store that much energy, but very difficult. So we have sodium batteries. They have less energy again. They're supposed to be an awful lot cheaper, because sodium is much more plentiful than lithium. So these are coming on the market. And we're now getting some of the exotic batteries where the basic battery doesn't change very much, but one of the components will, cathode or the anode or whatever it is, and that will change. And that will give a big breakthrough, because a battery is essentially a chemical reaction. And if you can speed that reaction up, you can get a lot more power out of it more quickly. So, of course, the ATL come out with the Shenzhen battery, which is LFP, but they've changed some of the components in it. And that gives it an awful lot more power, a lot more range, a lot more power density. But it's still an LFP battery, just a different chemical compound inside. And you'll find others like that, the Blade battery. But now, of course, we're looking into something totally different, and that is not using liquid electrolytes. So when you have a battery, you have a layer of, it's usually aluminium foil, and you paint onto that a paste. And of course, at the moment, what happens is you have to paint to spray it on, and then it has to dry completely. You can't wind it up. It'll squash like a cream donut, cream everywhere. So you have to paint it on, spray it on, and then allow it to dry. And that drying process takes between 12 and 24 hours. You can't hurry it. So there's an issue, if you like, in making these things. There's a maximum speed you can get up to. You have to let these things dry. So what they're looking at now is they're looking at using dry coatings. And this is where you just put effectively a very, very thin layer of an adhesive, and then put a solid on, not a liquid, put a solid on. And these batteries are coming onto the market. Now, they don't dramatically change the chemistry, they don't dramatically change the power density or anything. What it does is it allows you to put a very fine coat of adhesive on, spray the powder on, and then immediately roll them up and off they go. So what it does is dramatically speed up the manufacturing of it. And when you speed up manufacturing, if you have a factory that of a set size, and you can increase the speed from producing every 12 hours to producing every 5 minutes, you can produce a massive amount more on the same factory in the same period of time. And that drops your cost dramatically. Your material costs don't drop. Each battery will have its own material cost, but the manufacturing element of it, if you imagine a factory costs you £1 million and you only make one battery a day, that's a very, very expensive calculation. If, on the other hand, you can make 1 million a day, the cost of that factory per battery is dramatically reduced. And so this is where we're going at the moment. Everyone out there, these are all the battery manufacturers. So you've got a lot in China, CATL, BYD, you've got them in Korea and Japan, you've got LG, Panasonic. There are so many different manufacturers. And they're all looking for a number of key things. First of all, increasing the production rate so you can make them faster, therefore cheaper, and also being able to get more power out of them cheaper, which is why they're looking into sodium. So there's a lot going on, and the latest one is always, of course, solid state. Now, Toyota have been announcing this since, I think it's about 2015 was the first one they announced for one of their hybrids, and every year they've been saying, yeah, this is the breakthrough, this will take, they've never done it. And you have to think that if you've got dedicated battery manufacturing facilities with all the scientists, chemists and test facilities and everything, that it's unlikely that a car manufacturer like Toyota will suddenly come out with this breakthrough. So there's a certain amount of skepticism there. But the advantage of solid state is no liquid whatsoever. You're using solid electrolytes, and that means that the manufacturing is very much quicker. But also it means that the battery itself is much more efficient. They can take a higher power, they have a higher power density. They can take a higher charge power when you're charging them, and they can give you a higher discharge when you're using your electric motor. They also have a longer life, and they're also smaller. So there's a huge number of advantages. Smaller battery, much longer range, much more powerful, charges much quicker, discharges much quicker. This is really the holy grail of batteries. And they're coming out. They're in existence. There's never been any doubt about that. What is the problem, though, is the mass production of them. That if you can make a current NMC battery for, I don't know, just fictitious figures, for 10p, it's no good coming out with a solid state battery that's absolutely brilliant if it's £10. So you have to get them into mass production, and that's the key to everything. And that's what takes the time. There's a lot of testing going on. There's a lot of experimenting, different compounds. And they're finding that if you change one of the chemicals in the cathode, for example, take one up from 3% to 3.5%, it makes a big difference to the output. So there's huge amount of change still undergoing. And this is even with NMC and LFP batteries. They're constantly evolving. When they first came out, they're now about twice the density, power density, compared to when they came out. So huge advances. And also over the time, they found out how to mass produce them so they can make them quicker. So you're getting more powerful batteries, and they're much cheaper. And into that comes what I think everyone's heading for, which is the solid state. And they're talking now, they've actually achieved it. A number of people have claimed this, but these are battery manufacturers. I'm not going to name a specific one because they're all starting to bring out the batteries. So they've got the batteries now that work. Solid state, just to recap, very much more power density. They cram in a lot more power for the size or weight of the battery. So effectively, if you're putting it in a small car, you can put in a very much smaller battery, very much lighter, and that helps with your efficiency and range. They are very quick to charge, which is brilliant. They're talking about, a lot of them talking about 5 minutes, going from effectively 10% up to 80 or 90%. It's a massive speed, and it's right down into the sort of time it takes to fill a petrol or diesel car. And when we get that parity, one of the big arguments, the big myths against having an EV has just gone out the window. If you could pull into a charger, which is designed for solid state batteries, you can plug it in, you can go to the motorway services toilet, have a pee, come back, and your battery's full. That's the ideal, because at that point, an EV will be exactly the same as having a petrol car for road trips. So this is why everybody's looking for it. But if you think about it, they ran NMC batteries, the 18650s, for about 10 or 15 years, and they're still making them today. They're very different today, but looking back 15 years ago, the NMC batteries, they're still popular. They're very good for energy density, very good for the more powerful cars, or the bigger cars, or the longer range cars. So they're still valid. LFPs took over essentially at the lower end of the market about 5-6 years ago, and they've become very popular, and an awful lot of manufacturers now are installing those, not for the fact that they're safer or anything else, just purely for the fact that the batteries are cheaper. They're about 10 to 20% cheaper to put an LFP battery in, a bigger one by the way, to give you the same power, 10 to 20% cheaper than an NMC battery. So they are very popular with the manufacturers, and they have, I wouldn't say conned, but they've sort of convinced the EV potential drivers that LFP, they can't catch fire, they're really safe, they're really good, you can charge them up to 100%, you can discharge 100%, these are the batteries you want. It's nothing to do with that. It's to do with the fact that they save 10 or 20% on the cost of the battery, and the battery's the biggest cost in a single unit in the entire EV. They are good batteries, got nothing against them. The only thing is that people do misunderstand them. So for example, this, well, you can charge it to 100% and down to 0. Yes, you can. But you can do that with an NMC. It's just that an LFP, if you do that, will last longer than if you do it to an NMC. But an LFP battery, if you charge it every time from 0 right up to 100%, discharge it, that will shorten its life. Not quite as much as an NMC, but it will shorten its life. So there's a bit of a confusion there over it. Any battery you can charge to 100% and you can discharge. It's the damage you do, or the life you take out of it, that's critical, and LFP handle that better. But people now think, oh, LFP, you can run it up to 100% down to 0, etc. So what we have now is a number of competing technologies coming out. Tesla's just announced they've got a breakthrough in the battery. CATL has come out with the Shenzhen. BYD's come out with a new one. Panasonic, they're all coming out with new batteries, and all of them have working batteries. What is going to be the key now is to get the first one where it's in mass production, where the price and availability, because don't forget, they haven't got factories for these yet, where the price and availability makes it cheaper than what's on the market at the moment. And when that happens, the adoption will be very, very quick. So we are looking forward at the moment to the first of the solid state batteries coming out almost certainly this year in a mass produced car, but it's early days. It will be tried and tested. They will find things with it and be able to change it and modify it and everything else. So that's where we are with the batteries. Nobody out there has any idea who's going to be first. They're all having problems. Tesla, when they announced their 4680 battery, what was that, 5 years ago? They still, this year, have only just started coming into full speed mass production. It takes time. So you're not going to see cars with 500-mile range costing £15,000 to buy on the market this week. That's going to be many years away. But that's where we're heading. If the batteries still keep getting cheaper, if the range and the power density still keeps increasing, what will happen is people will be able to make smaller and smaller and smaller batteries, which makes the car lighter. And we see this already with something like the Renault Twingo. Tiny little car that's having a battery in it that will give it a decent range. But the efficiency of that, because the battery's so small and light, they're talking that one in the early design stages is likely to be hitting about 7 miles per kilowatt hour, which is twice the amount of distance you get out of the average car today. Most cars about 3.5, 4 miles per kilowatt hour. So that's where we are. I hope that's been a help to you. I forget all these hype stories about this battery is going to get whatever it is, you know, all these massive, this is the best battery. Yeah, there's about 100 of them in development at the moment, and 1 or 2 of them will probably come through in the very near future, and some others will come through in the more middle distance future. So interesting to see what happens, but Personally, within a couple of years, we're going to be seeing 400-500 miles as a standard range on an EV and 10 to 15 minutes as a charging time. And that will be brilliant. So thanks very much for watching. If you've enjoyed this, please click the like button. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe, click the notification bell, and we can notify when we release videos. I'm Dave.